Hey everyone, Stegar here and welcome back to Hunterville. Today's episode is a suburban expansion episode, but we also build some public housing units, a supermarket, some sports fields, an elevated metro station, and part of a highway that will be completed in some future episode. So to start off with this episode, I decided to work in this small triangular area and place down a shell to start off with. This shell is by Cristolisto, the Shell gas station asset, and then beside it I also placed down a small industrial building and basically fill out the rest of this block with a whole heap of houses. I imagine that diagonal road where the industrial building is on, I imagine that was one of the main roads going through the city, and that has since been replaced by a sort of sunken road that goes underneath the train tracks rather than having to have level crossings over it, as I feel like that would interfere with traffic, and that has since been changed, and this road is not really any longer used by many people as it really goes nowhere anymore, and the connection has been cut off to allow this underground road to go through and connect up with the rest of the city out in this direction. Anyway, here I'm just finishing off the few houses along here before actually moving over to building this road that I've been rambling on about for the last few seconds. And here you can see it connects up coming out of the intersection on the left, sort of facing in the direction of the old road before curving down and heading towards the underpass area. And here I'm just filling in some trees to make it look a bit nicer along the edge. I think I end up changing those trees like 3 or 4 times as I mess around with that road a bit with both node controller and just generally changing what road type I use so that it's narrower. And just placing down a few grass things there to sort of fill up the area and have it a bit more detailed than just being plain undetailed grass texture. And here I'm moving over to this main road and just changing the number of lanes so that there are 4 leading into that intersection, and it gradually steps up from 2 to 3 to 4 across a few segments. And here just marking in the lane markings with the intersection marking tool, and also adding in this median, or the gap within the median, and using some curbs and some ploppable pavement or asphalt. I'm not exactly sure which one I used. I think I ended up using ploppable asphalt by the looks of how the textures compare with each other, but used procedural objects to essentially modify this into the right shape, and then sink it down very carefully so that it's almost flush with the curbs there. I mean, this isn't a perfect solution at all. I think there's some assets on the workshop that I could have used that match those median textures, but anyway, here is the final result of what I was trying to achieve anyway. Here in a minute once I just finish this little piece off, and then I think I repeated this process on the other node, but ended up changing that to being just the narrow 4-lane road and using the intersection marking tool to sort of make it all seem to nicely flow into the larger, wider roads. And here placing down some billboards on this corner. I feel like this would be the prime position to put billboards, as eventually I would hope that there'd be a lot of traffic coming down this road as the city expands. But we're also putting in this little path here that just kind of connects through and allows people to walk from that now dead-end street into that road, and then they can carry on to wherever else they want to go in the city. But here we're changing some of these metro tracks that I built in episode 10, I think it was. I just wasn't really happy with the direction they were heading and wanted to change the direction of one of the tracks, as well as connect them up a bit differently. And the track that kind of curves off there, that is going to lead into a metro station just beside where we were building before. And for that I used the industrial elevated station by Bad Peanut. And here I'm just fixing up the last of these metro tracks before moving over to that, and using node controller to make the curves look a lot nicer where these 2 tracks join. And here we're actually placing down the train station. And I just put it in the middle of where some of these houses were. I had to delete those and then go through with prop it up and delete the hedges that were on this building because I didn't want them there, and wanted the entrance to be quite close to that road that it's up against. I also continued this, what would have been a cul-de-sac road, or what was a cul-de-sac road, through to underneath the train station, and so that can connect up with some parking that I put there off camera. And now I'm just connecting up the last of this metro track before we move over to working on the low income housing and supermarket areas. So now we're into the second part of the episode, and here I'm building the public housing complex and using the Imperial Courts buildings by King Leno for this. There's two different buildings for this. There's a 4-tile long one and a 8-tile long one, I think. Anyway, there's two different sizes. I'm not entirely sure which is correct for the sizing though, but I think that's right. And here just sort of lining them up beside this pavement looking road. It's actually a road so that it functions for the road access, but is not paved in the same way as a regular road, but more so as a pavement, and then just putting down these 1x4 ultimate area fillers in between the buildings to act as pathways, and that goes through the middle of the gap ones and then around the side just to add some extra access and things, and then putting down a whole bunch of trees and bushes around the place to sort of fill up this empty space, as well as the bushes I put down the front in just a minute to sort of make it look a whole lot better. I imagine that this place is some, government-built facility for those that are struggling to find housing, and it just kind of serves its purpose and is not in the best part of town, as I was saying before. This area of town probably isn't the best part, but the area I build on the other side of the highway in this episode probably is a bit nicer. Anyway, here we're now starting on this supermarket, and I'm just putting down a general road layout to get an idea of where the parking lots go and then where the building will go. And to make the supermarket, instead of using some asset off the workshop, I'm putting together a whole bunch of these warehouses by Avanya, and then changing the color of them to yellow to resemble the Pak'nSave color scheme, which is a local supermarket here in New Zealand, and was just trying to incorporate that into my build today, as I sort of wanted to include some sort of New Zealand related thing. And then going through with these offices and also turning them yellow to kind of match with the whole theme. This isn't exactly like a real life Pak'nSave, but it's sort of the closest that I could get with this attempt of creating it anyway. And then here I just sunk down these buildings and ended up turning them into procedural objects, just so they didn't mess around with the terrain. Anyway, this build was kind of inspired and based off of the Pak'nSaves in Masterton and the one on Morehouse Avenue in Christchurch. And here are some examples of them. And now I'm going through and putting in this sign for the Pak'nSave branding, and then just use a color rectangle colored like a really dark yellow to fight with the brightness of the game, and then just making that bigger so that it fits in the sign, or I think I make it so that there's a grey outline on it or something, and then just put the text in, which is the last thing I do here. And then we're going to move over to the highway construction and suburban expansion part of the video. So before we get on to working on the highway, I wanted to mention that I did some off-camera work on the area that we built in episode 15 and added a rugby field as well as filled in the rest of the houses. I also put in a pedestrian bridge, a non-functional one I should say, above one of the main intersections that we did detail in the last episode, the short 10-minute episode that I did, and that is just intended for people to be able to access across it, but it doesn't actually function at this stage. And also I didn't record it, so I couldn't include it in anything. Also, there is a large section of this suburb that we're working on in this episode that I didn't include in the episode, as I felt like we had enough suburbs work that it didn't warrant being included. But anyway, I built a whole heap of houses and things, as you can see here. Anyway, now we're on to actually building this highway that I keep talking about. And first I needed to delete some houses that were in the way and would have been demolished to make way for this highway. And for the highways today, I'm using the concrete highways by class. I was originally planning on attempting to use CSUR in this series, but that was a long time ago, and before both the node controller and intersection marking tool mods came out. And to be honest, they basically changed my whole plans for this series in terms of using CSUR, as they allow me to find a way around making the merging and splitting ramps look somewhat decent without needing to resort to using CSUR, as it seems like a very complicated mod and I don't really want to have to deal with that if I don't have to. Anyway, we're just cutting through some of these houses that I placed off camera now. And yeah, just basically this highway was built after this area already existed, so they had to bulldoze through some of these houses as opposed to, you know, planning it out beforehand and reserving the land for when it got built, or just building through farm fields or something and not interfering with the rest of the city. But this area was here beforehand, so they had to destroy some homes, and that's what I'm trying to achieve with these roads, at least, is to try and make it look as though they've been destroyed as the highway's been put through. Anyway, here I've placed down this off-ramp. The on-ramp for this highway isn't going to be built in this episode, as it will be on the other side of that road, and I'll build it sometime in the future. I mean, the layout's going to look roughly like this diagram here, with that ramp looping back around and the other ramps being on the other side. Anyway, here I'm just editing these nodes and putting in the markings where the off-ramp splits from one lane into two. I feel like you need one lane to get off the highway itself, as this wouldn't be a very busy intersection, but the two just allows people who are turning right onto that road somewhere to queue if the traffic is not that great, while not holding up other vehicles. And here, just using the node controller mod as well as the intersection marking tool again to do where this lane splits off from the main part of the highway. And yeah, just putting in like the lines between the lanes as well as the edges, and putting a chevron where the two lanes split off, I think. Anyway, we're now going to move on to the final area in this episode, and this is a almost square area. I think it's not quite square, or at least I don't think it is. But here I'm just doing some not so gridded layouts. I mean, there's still parts that resemble a grid here, but in general I'd consider this not a grid. And there's also cul-de-sacs for one of the first times in this series, as we're now getting out into some of the what I would consider newer suburbs, so they don't exactly conform to a grid, and instead we'll have a lot of cul-de-sacs and weird roads that really only take you to houses and aren't very efficient for getting you anywhere else. And a lot of these main roads will carry the majority of the traffic through this area, as they are the most direct route. Also detailing that house on the corner there, as it didn't exactly fit with my pre-detailed houses, which are like 3x3 or 3x4. I have a few of those, and was like 3.5 grid tiles or something, so I had to kind of fit in a different house into that space. Anyway, here we're just finishing off the last of these houses and using that other road to try and get them lined up on that angle. And then I adjusted that curved road a little bit so that it's a bit straighter in front of those houses. And now we're placing down some rugby fields, as since this is a city that is heavily inspired by New Zealand and Australia, and rugby is quite a big sport in both countries, I decided to make some rugby fields along with that one that I mentioned that I did off camera. I also put a parking lot beside it and making this playground here now. I like to add a few playgrounds just around various places in the city so that, you know, kids have a place to play. I probably actually have too many compared to what there is in reality, but that doesn't matter too much anyway. And for those playgrounds I was just using the vanilla slides and swings and what have you, since I don't really think it's something that I need to go out of my way to try and find an asset off the workshop for, as they're just a very small detail and are barely noticeable depending on how you're looking at the city. And here we're focusing now on the very last thing we build in this episode, which is these few modern houses. These are actually from the Green Cities DLC, so they're vanilla, but you have to pay extra for them. And anyway, just trying to line these up to this road. I don't know whether this is some sort of housing development or it could even be some sort of motel complex. Either works, but anyway, they look over that rugby field quite nicely, and here I'm just adding in a few trees. But that brings us roughly to the end of the episode, so if you've enjoyed this one, make sure to leave a like. If you want to follow along with the series, which is at this stage the only series I have on my channel, subscribe and ring the notification bell. That way you'll get notified whenever I upload a video. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode, where we'll be building a tunnel under the city and a few interchanges for that.